Biovie Pharma is on a mission to discover new treatments, find cures, and make a difference for people that are suffering from neurological and neurodegenerative diseases. And with me is Cuong, the president and CEO, to talk about this. You're doing such interesting work, and I know a lot in Alzheimer's. And there was a new book that was out and other publications that have been critical of the medical industry for the lack of progress in Alzheimer's. I mean, there was so much hope, and then it seems to kind of stalled lately. What's your view on that?
You know, Charles Piller is an investigative journalist with Science magazine, and he recently published a book that essentially says groupthink has led and hampered the search for an Alzheimer's treatment by focusing only on reducing amyloid plaques and tau tangles, right? And I actually do agree with him that the community has gone down the wrong path. And when I first started working in Alzheimer's back in the late 80s, we all, of course, focus on amyloid and tau. But through the decades, there's never been an agent that can reduce plaques and tangles and reverse the cognitive decline associated with Alzheimer's, right? And over the course of the last decade or so, more and more researchers are coming around to the point of view that plaques and tangles themselves are not the toxic agent that's causing neurodegeneration, but what they're doing is causing inflammation.
Okay. And that's where you come in, because I know you've been doing work with inflammation. So the inflammation may be what should be looked at. So tell me what you're doing with that and explain more about why you think that might have more potential.
See, we believe that inflammation is the root of many things starting to go wrong in the body. But it's a very delicate process because inflammation is a natural part of how the body protects itself. So when the body faces an acute insult, such as an insect sting or an infection, immune cells kick in to try to fight it off. And it creates inflammation as part of that process. Right? But when the infection disappears, the inflammation subsides and things goes back to normal. The problem arises is when we continually expose the body to some factor that then leads the immune cells to be constantly fighting off something. This means that TNF-alpha is constantly being produced, which then leads to a condition called chronic low-grade inflammation.
Okay.
And TNF-alpha is known as the master regulator of inflammation. When it's present, it initiates a series of cascades that has been associated with Alzheimer's and a number of other diseases as well.
Oh, interesting. And what are the data? What does it show in terms of neuroinflammation and why you think this may be a reason?
Well, there's been more than 50,000 scholarly articles have been published in the last decade that links neuroinflammation to Alzheimer's, right? But unfortunately, it just cannot cut through and break through the clutter, the decades, and the many hundreds of thousands of articles that have been published on amyloid itself, right? So it's just a real difficult to break through. In addition to that, there's been a number of large studies, including one from the UK that looked at 50 million patient records. And what they found is that patients that are taking anti-TNF treatments for conditions such as rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's, and IBS, these patients experience a 50% lower risk of developing Alzheimer's. Right? And anti-TNF drugs are great for RA and so forth, but you can't use them to treat Alzheimer's, right? They do not cross into the brain, and they have other kinds of side effects and problems as well. But these patients, while they're taking it, while reducing the systemic inflammation, we believe it's also helping alleviate the neuroinflammation that's going on in the brain, and that may explain the 50% lower risk.
And I mean, I'm just amazed that the medical community, as you mentioned, groupthink, was so wrong for decades. I mean, I've been hearing about amyloid plaques for 25 years at least. How does that happen?
Well, I think this is a case of mistaking correlation with causation. What I mean here is that when you have TNF-alpha present, it drives the production of something called the amyloid precursor protein, which then leads to more amyloid and more plaques. Right? TNF-alpha also drives the phosphorylation of tau to make phospho-tau, which means more tau tangles. Now, researchers in the early days just saw that there's elevated levels of plaques and tau tangles in Alzheimer's patients. And the hypothesis then became these then are driving Alzheimer's disease, right? But over the decades, as we started working on this thing and we started reducing plaques and tangles, but we didn't see a corresponding change in cognition, right? So at somewhere along the way, we just stuck to the dogma of causation, whereas frankly, we should have just recognized it for what it is, which is, I believe, tau and amyloid are byproducts of the underlying pathology.
There was like a link there that was missing that they were doing. Because I know it's just been so hard to find a cure, and this would explain. Is neuroinflammation also related to other neurological diseases?
We believe it is, right? Because the brain is not one single entity. It has many different parts that play specialized roles. The hippocampus, for example, is critical to memory and therefore Alzheimer's. The basal ganglia produces dopamine and plays a critical role in movement and thus Parkinson's. So if the brain has an insult in the hippocampus and if you have inflammation, that may result in Alzheimer's symptoms. And if the insult is in the basal ganglia and you have inflammation, that may lead to Parkinson's. And of course, you may have insults in multiple parts of the brain, and therefore that's how you can get multiple conditions at the same time.
And it may be like a key there that you can unlock at some point.
Exactly.
So, and I know you're developing Bezyisterim, am I saying that right?
Yes, Bezyisterim.
Okay, I was pretty close. For Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, long COVID. What is the status with that, and what can people do until that drug reaches approval?
A great question. Thank you for that. Bezyisterim is a very novel molecule that crosses freely into the brain. So in our clinical trials, patients taking Bezyisterim for just 6 months saw a 68% slowing of cognitive decline compared to those taking placebo. That's a huge impact. And the number one reported side effect was a mild headache that disappeared after a day. Right? So we are now working to start another clinical trial to confirm those findings so that we can submit it to the FDA for approval. But that is still going to take some time for us to initiate that trial. What we are enrolling right now is a trial where we're putting Parkinson's patients onto Bezyisterim. Right? And these are Parkinson's patients who need to go onto therapy for the first time. So we're hoping to show that Bezyisterim could become first-line therapy for Parkinson's. Okay? And we will soon be enrolling long COVID trial in a long COVID patients in a trial where we would give them Bezyisterim to see if we can help with the really debilitating problems of brain fog, fatigue, and malaise, right? So if you are a Parkinson's patients who need to go onto therapy for the first time, or if you're a long COVID patient, you may want to go to our website to learn more about the trial and perhaps consider enrolling, right? But unfortunately, if you don't qualify for the trial, the only solution right now is a healthier diet, more exercise, and removing yourself from toxins and allergens that may lead to inflammation. Okay.
Well, best of luck with that trial, and let us know. Keep us up to date.
All right. Thank you. I look forward to coming back to inform you on progress.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jane, for having me.